Hey guys, it's Ms. Johnson and I'm here to bring you our part 1 video for Unit 4 Notes 3. We're going to be splitting this video up into a couple of different pieces here. So we will kick it off with number 1. So let's just do a quick review from yesterday about factoring by grouping. So when we have a polynomial that has 4 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, I can do what's called factoring by grouping. So I group the first 2 terms together, group the last 2 terms together, and take out those GCFs. So from 5y squared minus 15y, I can divide by 5 and y from both terms. So 5y is my GCF out front. 5y squared divided by 5y just leaves me with y. And then 15y divided by 5y leaves me with 3. There's subtraction in the middle. From the second set, I can take out a 4. And when I divide 4y by 4, 4 is my GCF out front. I'm left with y in the middle, and then minus 12 divided by 4, which is 3. And we know we've done this process correctly when the insides match, and they do in this case. So then the outsides become one of my factors, 5y plus 4, and then multiplied by the insides as my other factor, y minus 3. Let's do that one more time. So group the first 2, group the last 2. From the first 2, 18x squared minus 30x, I can take out a 6 and an x. So I'm going to divide both parts by 6x. That means 6x is my GCF out front. 18 divided by 6 is 3, and x squared divided by x is x. 30 divided by 6 is 5. X divided by x goes away. I have subtraction in the middle. Now from the second group, negative 3x plus 5, there's no numbers or variables that I can divide out other than 1. But I know that I want the leftovers to match what's left over here. And here I have a positive 3x and a negative 5. So with my negative 3x plus 5, I know that I need to take out a negative 1, not just a positive 1, because I want this negative 3x to turn into positive 3x, and I want this positive 5 to turn into negative 5. So that means I need to take out a negative 1. So I have negative 1 out front, and then I have 3x minus 5 left over behind. So my two factors are 6x minus 1 and 3x minus 5. All right. So now let's talk about what it means to factor trinomials. Now factoring by grouping worked when we had 4 terms. But what happens if you only have 3 terms? How do you group them together? Do you group the first 2, the last 2? What do you do? So when we are factoring when a is not equal to 1, we're factoring trinomials. Okay. The first thing that we want to do is we want to check for a GCF. Okay, if we have a GCF in all 3 of the terms, we're going to take it out. Then the second thing that we want to do, we're going to multiply the a times the c. This is the first term, the first coefficient, and the last coefficient. So the first and last coefficients. Remember that a standard form trinomial looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. So a times c. We multiply that together. Then after we multiply those together, we're going to set up a big factor x. And you'll see what this looks like. This is really just a way of organizing how we figure out what terms go into what piece. And then we solve the x. And then we're going to split the middle. We sometimes call this splitting the middle. Okay, so that b term is going to be split into whatever we find when we solve for the x in number 4. So split the middle b term and then factor by grouping. Okay, so the whole point of this process is the very fact that we start with 3 terms and we can't factor by grouping with only 3 terms. We have to factor by grouping with 4 terms. So somehow we need to strategically split the middle term of the trinomial so that we can factor by grouping. But we have to be smart about how we split the middle. We have to split it in a way that's going to work. So that's what all of this multiply the a times c, set up the x, solve the x is for. All right, so let's just try some. So the first thing I do is check for GCF. 5, 13, 6, can't do it. X not in the 6, so can't do it. No GCF in number 3. Now I set up my big factor X. So you're really going to want to draw yourself a large size X because you're going to be writing some things in the 4 sections of the X. So the top is going to be that A times C, which is 30. A times C. So A times C gave me 30. The bottom is going to be the middle term. Okay, so if you want to write down that setup of the factor X, this is A times C, this is B. Okay, so now we need to ask ourselves, what two things multiply to give me A times C? I'm going to slide this down a little bit. Multiply to give me A times C and add to give me B. So multiply to get the top, add to get the bottom. So the way I do that is I think of what multiplies to give me 30. Well, multiplication to get to 30 is 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6. There's a whole big long list, and you can actually make that list if it would help you. So I'd have 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6, and I think that's it, because then it would turn back and go 6 times 5 and so on. So what I need to do is figure out which one of these pairs of numbers add to give me 13. Well, this one adds to give me 31. This one adds to give me, I didn't mean to make these look like negatives. Hope that wasn't confusing you. Those are not negatives. 2 plus 15 gives me 17. 3 plus 10 gives me 13. 5 plus 6 gives me 11. So the numbers that add together to give me 13 and multiply to give me 30 is 3 times 10. Okay, so now that I know what my factor X numbers are, this is what I split my middle term. Split the middle term into 3 times 10. So I'm going to literally get rid of the 13. I'm going to rewrite, I keep this, I keep that. So I rewrite it in the same order, 5x squared, but now I put 3x plus 10x in its spot. Notice that my 6 came down in the same place and the 5x squared came down in the same place. The only thing I changed was that middle term. I split that 13x into 3x plus 10x because we know if we put 3x and 10x back together, that gives us 13x. But now, here's why this works. Now factor by grouping. When I factor by grouping, I put this in a group and I put that in a group. So from the first group, I can take out an x, which leaves me with 5x plus 3. From the second group, I can take out a 2, which leaves me with 5x plus 3. And look at that. I am now in factored form. So once you get to that point where you've split the middle term, then it's just the same as what we did yesterday. Okay, all of that factoring by grouping ends up being the same. Okay, so this is really a tricky process, and it's okay if you're like, what did Miss Johnson just do? I did not understand. That's really okay. That's why we're going to do this lots and lots and lots of times in this notes today, because it is such a tricky process. So let's start with number 4. So I have a trinomial, 3 terms. I start by finding a GCF. 7, 29, and 4 have no common factors, and since the 4 doesn't have an x, I can't take out an x. So I'm done with GCF. Now I set up my factor x. Factor x is going to look like this. The top is a times c. Here's my a, here's my c. 7 times 4 gives me 28. The bottom is just the b term. Here's my b term. That's going to be 29. So now we need to ask ourselves what two numbers multiply to give me 28 and add to give me 29. And again, if it helps you to make a list, do that. I start with the 28 and list all the things that multiply to give me 28. So that would be 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 and 7, not 3, not 5, not 6. So then I get back to 7 and 4. Okay, so those are my 3 options that multiply to 28. Then I would check what they add to. This one adds to 29, so that looks like it could be my winner. This one adds to 16. This one adds to 11, so it's got to be the 1 and 28. So that is what I now split my middle into, 1 and 28. Remember that you're going to end up writing x's on them because you're splitting that middle term into something that's equivalent to that original middle term. So 29x just now becomes 1x plus 28x. So let's rewrite that. We keep this, we keep that. 7x squared plus 1x plus 28x plus 4. Okay, now I group because now I went from 3 terms to 4 terms, which was the whole point of this. The whole point of the factor x is to give you 4 terms to factor. So now 7x squared plus 1x, I can take out an x. So then I have 7x plus 1. And then 28x plus 4, I can take out a 4. And that leaves me with 7x plus 1. And again, that's just factoring by grouping like what we did yesterday. So my insides match, 7x plus 1, 7x plus 1. I have x plus 4 and 7x plus 1. There we go. All right, let's try number 5. So flip your page. In number 5, again, I start by looking for a GCF, which here I don't have one. So now I would go straight to setting up the factor x. So when I multiply first term times last term, my first coefficient is a 1. So I'm going to multiply 1 times 16 and get 16. Sorry, that red is kind of ugly to see on that. So I have a 16 there. The middle term, be very careful here, is actually negative 10. Okay, so that's the B term that goes down on the bottom. Now, it's weird to think about things that multiply to give you a positive number and add to give you a negative number, but they do actually exist. They do actually exist. I can actually find them. So if I think about things that multiply to 16, I would have 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. Those are kind of my 3 options. Now, those are all positive. I want to get a negative 10 product. That means I need to make these negative. So I'm sorry, not a negative 10 product. I want a negative 10 sum, but I want a positive 16 product, which means if you want a positive product, they better be the same sign. So negative 1 times negative 16, if I add those together, adding those up gives me negative 17. If I add negative 2 and negative 8, that gives me negative 10. Well, that one looks like it could be my winner. If I add negative 4 and negative 4, that one looks like it, or that one gives me negative 8. So my option here is negative 2 and negative 8. Negative 2 times negative 8 is positive 16. Negative 2 plus negative 8 is negative 10. So split this. So I'm going to get rid of the 10x. I'm going to split that into negative 2x minus 8x. If it helps to throw the x's on in the factor x, go ahead and do that. So I have 1x squared. Remember, your first and last stay the same. It's a common habit for people to want to take this b term and throw it on the end because it's in the bottom of the x. You would need to keep the original c term. So 1x squared minus 2x minus 8x plus 16. And now I factor by grouping. So from this group, I can take out an x. And I have x minus 2 left over. And then from that group, I can take out an 8, but actually I want it to be a negative 8 because if you'll notice, this one is negative and that one's positive. I want them to flip. I want the first one to be positive and the second one to be negative. So that means I need to take out a negative 8. So I have a negative 8 out front, and that leaves me with positive x and minus 2 behind. So positive x minus 2, positive x minus 2. I know I've done it right. That's x minus 8 and x minus 2. Okay. So let's take a look at number 6. In number 6, I have 1x squared minus 7x minus 18. Still no GCF to take out, so I'm going to go straight to setting up my factor x. On the top, I have 1 times negative 18, which is negative 18. On the bottom, I have a negative 7. All right, so now I have a negative product. When you have a negative product, that means that one of the two numbers that you make has to be negative. You've got to have one positive and one negative. So this is going to be like positive 1 and negative 18, positive 2 and negative 9, positive 3 and negative 6, and that's it for my options. But it could also be negative 1 and positive 18, negative 2 and positive 9, negative 3 and positive 6. Okay, when I add all of those up, kind of ran out of room here, so I'm going to slide this over for just a little bit. When I add all those up, I end up getting, if I add this, I get negative 17. If I add this, I get negative 7. If I add this, I get negative 3. If I add this, I get positive 17. If I add this, I get positive 7. And if I add these three, I get positive 3. So product of negative 18 was all of these options. Sum of negative 7 is this one right here. So those are going to be my options, 2x and negative 9x. And that's what's going to go right there in the middle. So now let me move these back out of the way. So I split my middle. The middle is now going to look like, let's do this one, 1x squared plus 2x minus 9x minus 18. And I group and take out the GCF. So when I take out the GCF, I can divide this one by x. So I have an x out front, which leaves me with x plus 2. And this second group, they're both negative, and I want them both to be positive. So I know I'm going to need to take out a negative, and I can take out a 9. So negative 9, that leaves me with negative 9x divided by negative 9 is positive x. Negative 18 divided by negative 9 is positive 2. X plus 2, x plus 2. So I have x minus 9 as one factor, x plus 2 as the other. Factored form. All right, we're going to do a couple more, and then we're going to take a break and finish up the rest in the next video. So in number 7, I have 6x squared plus 22x minus 8. Now, this is one where I notice I can take a GCF of 2 out from everything. So that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to divide everything by 2. And what that does for me is leave me with 2 out front, and then 3x squared plus 11x minus 4 inside. Okay, so now this is like the GCF that's just hanging out front. Okay, that's a GCF of the whole thing. We are going to just leave that off and bring it back down into our factored form at the end. I like to draw that little arrow in so I don't forget to actually take the whole thing off. So now I need to factor this middle trinomial. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to set up my factor x. I have 3 and negative 4, which is negative 12. Middle term is 11, that goes on the bottom. Um, Hopefully you're starting to see some of these things before you, without having to make the list. If you still want to make the list of things that multiply to negative 12, that's fine. But just know you don't have to. So if I want a negative 12 product and a positive 11 sum, that means I need negative 1 and positive 12. Negative 1 times 12 is negative 12. Negative 1 plus 12 is 11. So that's what I'm going to split my middle terms into. So put x's with those. I have 3x squared, that stays the same, minus 1x plus 12x minus 4. And now I group. Group and group. Divide by x. I have x out front, 3x minus 1 behind. Divide by 4. So 4 out front, 3x minus 1 behind. Insides match. X plus 4 and 3x minus 1. Now, this is where this little arrow comes into play because I need to remember that I had an original GCF of 2 out front. I have to put that back on. So that is my factored form. Okay, let's try one more in number 8. Number 8, I have x squared plus 3x plus 2. No GCF. I'm just going to set up my x. 1 times 2 is 2. 3 goes on the bottom. I didn't want a product of 2 and a sum of 3. There's only one option. It's 2 and 1. So 2 times 1 gives me 2. 2 plus 1 gives me 3. Split your middle term. So I'm going to split that 3x. I have x squared plus 2x plus x plus 2. And then I group, because now I have 4 terms, and now I can group. I can take out an x. So I have an x out front, then I have x plus 2 behind. Here I can just take out a 1, that's it, but don't forget that you have to represent that. X plus 2, same, x plus 1, x plus 2. There we go. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop our video there for today. We'll come back tomorrow and finish the rest of the notes. Thanks for listening.